My paper will take you a few centuries back, compared with this morning, and I'll talk about the Mamluk period. The exchange of diplomatic gifts in pre-modern time was an institutional practice and a matter of great political significance worldwide. In medieval diplomacy, in East and in West, the diplomatic gift was, I quote, a crucial means to enable the transition from war to peace, to cultivate relationships and promote allegiances between rulers or governments. End of quote. It's not going too far to say that alongside the written and the oral messages, gifts were the third medium of diplomatic communication. The diplomatic gift belonged to the category of gifts defined by the French anthropologist Marcel Mauss in the 1930s as a deliberate and yet obligatory, self-interested and yet liberal act. My topic today focuses on one aspect of diplomacy of the Mamluk Sultanate, which is diplomatic gifts across religious borders. And I may be showing the distinction between gifts given to Muslims and gifts to others. In this case, it will be Christian partners. The Mamluks ruled Egypt and Syria from 1250 to 1517. They are often described as a slave dynasty, although in fact they are neither a real dynasty nor real slaves, but a regime that appears today as very odd, although it was less odd at that time. The Mamluks were initially purchased, or rather recruited on the slave market to be soldiers in an elite corps of the army of the last sultan of the Ayyubid dynasty who ruled Egypt between 1240 and 49, as-Salih Najmuddin Ayyub. After as-Salih's death, the Mamluk Court took hold of his throne and maintained the system of recruitment he introduced for the next centuries for their rule for the 2.5 centuries, rather than returning to the previous dynastic system. The rule of the Mamluks was a glorious period for Egypt and Syria, as he shows the map, and the last age of brilliance for the Arab pre-modern world. The Mamluk sultans earned their legitimacy being foreigners and outsiders originally. They had to earn their legitimacy, which they did by being the only power who managed to defeat the Mongols and had the invasion and hold the invasion, and by evicting the Crusaders from Arab territories. Their sultanate owed its wealth and prosperity to the blessing of its geographical position, in addition to the natural and human resources of Egypt and Syria, the spice trade between the Far East and Europe, of which they held the monopoly, provided a major source of revenue. This was an age of commercial revolution in the world in which the spice trade was a driving force. Trade and related matters of safety and freedom of passage were therefore a major factor in Mamluk diplomacy. The strongly centralized character of the Mamluk Sultanate gave the Sultan the control over the foreign trade, and which fastened the link between diplomacy and commerce. As much as trade, pilgrimage was intimately linked with Mamluk diplomacy. The Mamluk sultans controlled the major holy cities of both Islam and Christianity, compelling Christian and Muslim states to cultivate diplomacy with them and win their favor. For the Christians, safe passage for the pilgrims and the safety of the churches in the Holy Land were matters of great concern that needed regular negotiations. The Mamluk sultans were very well aware of their leverage in the world, which they cultivated and displayed in lavish receptions of foreign embassies in their capital, Cairo, and in the splendor of the gifts they offered. Mamluk Cairo, which was the largest city in the world at this period, excepting perhaps the Far East, has been recently described as crossroads of embassies. And the map which I'm using here, every single place made on the map is a place which had contact, diplomatic contact and exchanges with the Mamluk Sultanate. Wherever you have a name of a country or a city, it's a place with which the Mamluks exchanged diplomatic relations. The act of presenting diplomatic gifts has always been in the medieval and pre-modern East and West part of an elaborate ceremonial. The reception of an embassy would include the display of gifts at the court to enhance the prestige of the recipient among his subjects. This explains why, in some cases, we have more information about Mamluk gifts from foreign sources than from Mamluk ones. For example, this image here shows an embassy sent by the Mamluk Sultan Farag ibn Bakuk at the beginning of the 15th century to Timur in Samarkand, and it included various items, but most prominently a giraffe. And this is why it has been depicted in a double page and illustrated showing the giraffe. And in fact, we also have a long description of this gift and of the giraffe by Clavijo, the Spanish ambassador, who was at that same time in Samarkand as well. And although we know nothing of this embassy and of this gift from Mamluk sources, also here, this is we have here this is at in Milan at the Castello Sforzeso, where you have along the galleries, which is the royal residence here, a fresco. There were that too, in fact. This one, which shows a Middle Eastern person bringing an elephant or holding an elephant or accompanying an elephant, and there is another one showing also the part of a feline, which refers to an embassy sent by Sultan Qaitbay in 1473 to Milan, to the Duke of Milan, with these exotic animals. So it is not. Also, this one is not mentioned in the Mamluk sources, but it is made here, depicted here in a very prominent place in the ducal residence. Also, the giraffe sent by the same Sultan Qaitbay a few years later to Lorenzo di Medici in Florence crowns the ceiling of an important residential room in the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence. So these mentioned gifts, which are, I will come back to that later, and you can see here the centrality of the roof in the room, and I will come back to this painting later. None of these gifts are mentioned in the Mamluk sources, but they are here where they were received to enhance the prestige of the recipient in front, in his environment and among his courtier and his people. The gifts honored not only the recipient, but the giver as well. The historian, who was also an emir, Ibn Abd al-Zahir, wrote in the early 15th century that gifts attest to the grandeur of the giver. Besides self-representation, diplomacy and diplomatic gifts served also immediate and strategic interest. In a conversation with one of his bureaucrats, Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad emphasized the strategic significance of diplomatic gifts as being only a small investment, no matter how expensive they are or how lavish they are a small investment in comparison with the military and other costs of conflict they helped saving. Diplomatic gifts were not a private privilege of the ruler, but a matter of the state. Gifts were registered in state archives that were kept for centuries, recording the monetary values in dinars of every gift package received, as well as the value of the reciprocated gifts. Such registers are also mentioned in other courts, the Abbasid court, the Byzantine, the Aragonese, and I'm sure it was a common practice everywhere. The monetary value recorded in this archive served as a yardstick to measure the value of the gifts to be then later reciprocated. There was a hierarchy in the value and also on the occasion in which gifts were sent. Some special occasions or particular reasons required gifts to be more valuable than usual. For example, the gift sent by Sultan Baybars in the mid-13th century to the Mongol ruler Berke Khan of the Golden Horde, which celebrated the conversion of Berke and his people to Islam, and at the same time the alliance between the two rulers against their common enemy, the Ilkhanid rulers of Iran, were the most celebrated in Mamluk historiography. I mean, this is this is the most described gift of all, or gift package in Mamluk sources, the gift of Baybas to Berke, and it fills more than a page just listing the list. So there were traditional gifts like a series of exotic animal, elephants, and themselves imported, including birds and other than, of course, textiles, which belong to all diplomatic gifts universally. Local textile, locally made textile, as well as imported textile, Chinese porcelains, artifacts of all kinds, lighting implements, and so on, edibles, food, even cooking pots, as well as human beings, of course, male and female slaves, and most of all, or perhaps the most important and most rare gift was a copy of a Quran manuscript said to have been penned by the Caliph Osman. And as well, very similar to that, the gift sent by the Sultan, Mamluk Sultan Jakmak to Mehmed the Conqueror on the occasion of the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 were of particular lavishness as well. And interestingly, in the second case as well, we are told that a manuscript Quran, again penned by the Caliph Osman, was among the gifts that were sent. Okay, it's said to be, they were probably very old manuscripts, not necessarily by the Caliph Osman. Today there are so many, or several of them. There's one in Cairo, one in Tashkent, and one in Istanbul. I think these are the three manuscripts said to have been penned by Osman. And then there's the two that the Mamluk sultans sent abroad. So I'm wondering if there was not a workshop preparing. But this is, I mean, perhaps just a way of saying that it's old, that it is an old manuscript. So in both cases, it's about the conversion to Islam, in the case of the Golden Horde, and the conversion of Constantinople to an Islamic capital by the Ottomans. So these were particularly to be celebrated with special gifts. The celebration of the triumph of Islam did not preclude the cultivation of friendly diplomatic relations with non-Muslim states. The Mamluks cultivated quite amicable relations with Byzantium, which didn't prevent them to celebrate with great festivities in Cairo the fall of Constantinople. Al-Zahir Baybas, who was the first great Mamluk sultan and ruled in the third quarter of the 13th century, combined the virtues of a military hero who won victories against Mongols and Crusaders with the wisdom of a statesman who, for the sake of stability and commerce, cultivated diplomatic relations with European states, including also the former enemies and contemporary Crusader royals. He exchanged embassies and signed truces with the remaining Crusader rulers in the Levant, as well as with the Hohenstaufen, the Angevin kings of Sicily, with Castile, Aragon, France, Genoa, and Byzantium. The Christian powers on their side equally needed the favorable attitude of the sultans for commercial purpose and for the sake of the churches in the Holy Land. The exchange of gifts was part of the diplomatic, because it was part of the diplomatic dialogue, it went on even in time of extreme conflicts and warfare, sometimes even accompanying hostile messages and belligerent messages. Diplomatic relations with gift exchange went on for this reason with the Crusader kingdoms between battles and during sieges, sometimes accompanying prisoners to be ransomed or exchanged. When the French king Philippe le Beau sent in 1329 an embassy with a letter to Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad demanding from him to relinquish the Syrian coast and Jerusalem, the Sultan felt so outraged that he insulted the envoys. But this did not prevent him from fulfilling his hospitality duty and took charge of the embassy's maintenance as it should be. The Mamluk Sultan selected the diplomatic gift they sent to other courts according to a complex pattern that followed some conventions that were valid worldwide at the time, which they combined with ancient Middle Eastern traditions and local traditions as well inherited from their immediate predecessors, to which they introduced their own specific variations and predilections. A major feature of diplomatic gift was to include curious and exotic items to make one wonders, and gifts are always mentioned in all sources as in Arabic, tuhaf wa hadaya, or hadaya and tuhaf, and the same thing in Persian and Turkish texts as well, which means gifts and wonder things. So even the diplomatic letters use the term athafa, which means to wonder in connection with gifts, to say that the gifts have been received, thank you very much, and they have fulfilled their function of making one wonder athafa. And there's a whole genre in Arabic literature dedicated to tuhaf and hadaya, to diplomatic gifts and the wonder of diplomatic gifts. The Mamluk offered always textiles and exotic animals to most of the diplomatic counterparts, as well as horses and horse trappings. Horses were a universal gift worldwide, even in Europe, to the eve of modern time, almost short before automobiles became current. This is the most universal of all gifts, the horse. And the horse trappings as well, which has, for the Mamluks, a very specific role to play, because the Mamluk themselves were a cavalry corps. And the horse and horsemanship and the horse trappings played a very important role in their own identity. So horse trapping belongs to almost every gift they gave. As well as also spices and Chinese porcelain are also regularly mentioned, mainly, but not exclusively, to European courts, because these did not have direct access to the trade of the Far East. It had to go through the Mamluks, who had the monopoly. So there was no direct connection to import porcelain as spices as much as they wished. While Chinese porcelain was commonly used on the tables of the Mamluk court and the elite, it was a much rarer commodity in Europe. And for example, here we have a scene of the Mamluk manuscripts of the early 16th century showing Chinese porcelain, and we know from accounts in the sources that they were by the hundreds on the table, and they were common ware on the table of the aristocracy and, of course, at the court. In Europe, we also know from inventories of collections of the Medici, for example, that they were much more scarce. And here it's very interesting, because this picture, which had already been used by Carswell in his book Blue and White, shows the feast of the gods, and yet you have only 3 or 4 plates, not more than that, for the gods. So it was to show that how important it was then when the Mamluks sent gifts to Europe. Chinese porcelain was always included, and by the dozens. Sometimes when it's very much, there were about 20 or 30 items, whereas, as I said, they owned them by the thousands and the hundreds. And there was also the Mamluk sent, there were other things that were sent to Christians, and particularly because they were very much valued there. This was the teriac, which is a medical product made for out of the gift, the poison of snakes that were cooked and prepared in a certain way, and then it was used as antidote. And the Italian, the Venetian also had antidote at that time. The Mamluk teriac was supposed to be better, and it was also included. I found it particularly in gifts related to Europe, because they were very keen on having this medical product. Among the most important gifts offered by the Mamluk to their Muslim counterpart were weapons. and some of which may have been of ceremonial character. We have nothing, almost nothing of the diplomatic gifts I'm talking about have survived, but some nice, lavish pieces of armor or in museum may give an idea. For example, like this one, which is a Mamluk coat of arms, a Mamluk male shirt in Istanbul. Today, it would give an idea of the beauty of this kind of object that were given as gifts, but we don't know if these were really gifts or they were a booty. But gifts, weapons, armors, shields, and so on, as we see them on this picture, were almost an obligatory gift item to Muslim countries. And I'm saying to Muslim countries because the Christians did not receive, as far as I could tell from my research, did not ever receive armors from the Mamluk. It was a period of bans on both sides where the Christians did not sell anything that was of strategic significance because of the papal ban on such exports and also on gifts, and the Mamluks didn't send either weapons to the Christians. But I'm not sure, and this is a question that I would like to have answered, if all Muslim rulers did the same. I found, for example, that a Moroccan ruler sent to James II of Aragon different gifts that included swords. And also there is a Mamluk exception to this rule. Sultan and Nasser Muhammad in the early 14th century sent some, and this is an exceptional find, a case that I found, a sword, bows, crossbows, and shields also to King James II of Aragon. It seems to me that this was a special sign of recognition, which is also confirmed by the particularly amicable style of their correspondence. The letter that accompanied these gifts of Nasser Muhammad is formulated in a very warm tone, mentioning friendship and even affection, mahabba, between the two monarchs. And in the course of this correspondence, the Sultan agreed to James' request to free some Christian prisoners, although these had been captured while supporting the enemies of supporting the enemies of Islam. The ban on weapons in the exchange of gifts between Europe and the Muslim world is also confirmed on the Christian side, and especially for the Crusader period. Just let me show you one more example of what could have been sent as diplomatic gifts. It's not exactly, yes, a horse, armor, but the ban could be broken also in some cases. For example, the rule was broken, could be broken according to the circumstances, as in the case of the French Jacques Coeur. I didn't reach that one yet. Jacques Coeur. In the mid-15th century, during the reign of the French King Charles VII, 1422 to 61, who successfully terminated the 100 Years' War, unified France and established a new order where stability, innovation, and a growing appetite for consumption favored a commercial opening into the Mediterranean. These new trends were embodied in the person of a man called Jacques Coeur, an overseas merchant, dynamic and innovative entrepreneur, treasurer and supplier of the king, and today it's a very famous figure anyway, and the wealthiest man of France until his dramatic fall in disgrace and his trial in 1453. Jacques Coeur, who had traveled to Damascus in his earlier career, was keen to secure a place for France in the Orient market, alongside Venice, Florence, Genoa, and Aragon. For this purpose, he founded a commercial fleet to trade directly in the Mediterranean Sea. His influence and prestige allowed him to negotiate on behalf of the French king, and his agents had access to the Mamluk Sultan Jakmak, who granted him significant privileges. Jacques Coeur managed to arrange a treaty between the Knights St. John in Rhodes and Sultan Jakmak, and to obtain the release of Christian prisoners from Mamluk captivity. During this diplomatic intercourse, Jacques Coeur exchanged gifts with Jakmak. He sent him lavish horse trappings, a mail shirt, 6 glaives, 6 axes, and a steel crossbow with a quiver containing 6 arrows. Having become too wealthy and powerful at the French court to the extent of financing the king's military campaigns, Jacques Coeur's career had eventually to be brutally terminated. He was put to trial, and among the accusations he had to face was to have sold silver and given weapons to the Sultan and sent craftsmen to Cairo to produce them, these weapons, which was anti-Christian behavior. Jacques Coeur defended himself vehemently with the argument that this was only an adequate token of gratitude to the Sultan for the significant privileges he had granted to the French merchants, adding that this anyway had been done in the name and with the approval of the king. And he was, however, jailed and only had to escape shortly afterwards, where he died a few years later. Of course, these excuses or these accusations were an excuse, but it's interesting to show their significance. When it was necessary, they could be used as anti-Christian behavior. About half a century later, another break of the papal ban was mentioned. After the conquest of Cyprus by the Mamluks in 1427, which achieved a long-awaited revenge for the devastating sack of Alexandria by the king of Cyprus, Pierre de Lusignan, 7 decades earlier, in 1365, the kings of the island became vassals of the Mamluk and had to pay tribute in cash and kind to the end of the Mamluk Sultanate, and after that the tribute went to the Ottomans. Until then they conquered the islands altogether. As a result, the Mamluk sultans found themselves often involved in the complicated quarrels of throne succession in Cyprus. King Ferdinand of Naples, who wished to see his illegitimate son Alfonso on the throne of the island, requested the support of Sultan Qadbeh in this matter. To ingratiate himself with him, he sent him a very unusual gift that consisted of a ship, an entire ship loaded with military equipment of all kinds, included firearms, cannons, projectiles, and a big selection of white arms, which delighted the Sultan but shocked the Europeans who happened to witness the arrival of these gifts at the court. This gift, a blatant disregard of the Pope's ban of strategic goods to Muslim countries, was obviously more than the mere reciprocation of the gifts that Qadbeh had sent Ferdinand in 1480, which included textiles and a giraffe. Armors and weapons from a Christian king were indeed exceptional at this period. Nevertheless, Ferdinand's ambitions in Cyprus could not materialize. Since the Crusades, human beings, just as weapons, were also banned in the diplomatic gift exchange between the Mamluks and Europe. Slaves, craftsmen, and Mamluks, that is, young military recruits, were another diplomatic gift that regularly was exchanged between the Mamluk Sultanate and the rest of the Muslim world. And even before that, the Byzantines used to send slaves to Muslim countries. So there was human diplomatic gifts before the age of the Crusaders. But then at the time of the Crusaders, at the time when of the Mamluk Sultanate, it stopped existing, and it must have been part of the ban, of course. Mamluks were, so the Mamluks were particularly expensive because these were young men chose for military recruitment for their own army. They were bought at very high prices. So a gift like this was a very valuable gift. The ban on human gifts for Christians and vice versa did not exclude sometimes the exchange of prisoners of war, of course. For example, as a gesture of goodwill, after signing a truce with the Crusader king Hugh of Antioch, Biber sent him 20 Christians who had been in his captivity. Theoretically, Christians were not even supposed to be directly involved in the human trade which supplied the Mamluk sultans with young men or Mamluk from the Crimea. In practice, the Genoese controlled this trade from the port of Kaffa on the Black Sea and profited from its taxation, for which they were criticized by the Pope. And although Genoese and Venetians were involved in the slave trade, and they themselves held slaves, there were made distinctions, exactly as the Muslims did, that they did not enslave Christians, like the Muslims did not hold Muslim slaves. In the medieval exchange of diplomatic gifts, trophies of war were used to advertise a military achievement, to propagate some military successes. Sultan al-Zahir Baibars sent the German king Manfred von Hohenstaufen Mongol soldier with the horses that he had captured in his battles against the Mongols. This gift of human beings may appear an exception to the rule, but the situation was different in that it conveyed a political message to the European, perhaps also a threat, that the Mamluks, who had just recently risen to power, had beaten the Mongols and were a power to be reckoned with. At the same time, it was a warning against alliance schemes that were in the air between Europe and the Mongols. Later on, following another successful battle against the Mongols, Nasser Muhammad sent Mongol captive to the Marinid Sultan of Morocco to announce his triumph. Christian captives were a particularly valuable gift at Muslim courts. In the course of the glorious series of conquests in Europe, the Ottomans continued to proudly send Christian captives to the Mamluk Court. It's over a century, this kind of gifts went on. In 1396, after his conquest of Nicopolis, in today Bulgaria, from Sigismund of Hungary, Bayezid sent 200 prisoners from different nations, including French and Italians, as a diplomatic gift to the Mamluk Sultan. The Venetian merchant Pilotti, who dwelt in Cairo at that time, saw them and spoke with them. He reported that they were converted to Islam and integrated in the Mamluk establishment. They were young, handsome, and choice, he says. After the conquest of Constantinople, Mehmed II sent Sultan Jacquemart a group of Byzantine high dignitaries, along with gold florins from the spoils. A historian described the celebration of the procession of the Byzantine dignitaries in Cairo as spectacular as that of the pilgrimage caravan. Thanks to the Ottoman expansions in Europe, with the resulting continuous booty, European Mamluks were numerous at the Mamluk Court, also in the later period. Felix Fabri, a pilgrim visiting Cairo in the 1480s, met a Hungarian man who had been captured by the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid II, who sent him as a gift to Sultan Qaitbay. For the Ottoman, this gift was rather a good riddance, because this Hungarian captive had fiercely resisted all possible attempt to convert him to Islam, even under death threat. But he was converted instead to a diplomatic gift. In Cairo, apparently, he was allowed to keep openly his Christian faith. Unlike the Europeans, the Ethiopians, who were Christians affiliated to the Coptic Church of Egypt, don't seem to have had inhibitions in sending slaves to the Mamluks. Rather, they were a major provider of black slave girls and eunuchs alongside spices and exotic animals. Ethiopia was a trade partner and a link in the Red Sea trade connection, which attracted Mamluk overseas merchants. The Ethiopians depended on the Mamluks on their side for access to the Mediterranean and to the pilgrimage sites in the Holy Land, as well as for the safety of the churches and property in Jerusalem. The Coptic Patriarch of Alexandria invested the Ethiopian king, and he appointed the head of the Metropolitan of the Ethiopian Church and the bishops from among the Coptic clergy of Egypt. Political crises between the two countries or the two churches could lead to long vacancies at the head of the Ethiopian Church. Making use of this authority, the Mamluks often employed the Coptic Patriarch as an intermediary in their contacts with Ethiopia. The Ethiopian monarchs on their side regularly pressured the Mamluk authorities to show more tolerance toward the Coptic community, threatening to let the Muslims in their country suffer the consequence of the persecutions if the Copts were enduring under Mamluk rule. The gifts received by the Mamluks from Ethiopia were usually lavish, with much gold in the form of jewelry, vessels, horse trappings, and jars full of gold beads, as well as swords with gold adornment. And there were also, or mainly, exotic animals that included giraffes, elephants, onagers, and lions. On one occasion, the Ethiopians sent a pair of lions described as black as the night. They also sent gum, civet perfume, oud, and other exotica, along with slave girls, many of whom died on the way and the journeys, and eunuchs. Many of the gifts, in particular animals received from Ethiopia and also from Yemen, were sent again as Mamluk gift, especially the animals and the scents, were sent again, received from Ethiopia and sent by the Mamluks to Europe. For example, civet perfume, which was very much valued in Europe at that time. Among the slaves that the Ethiopian sent to Cairo was a man called Jawshar al-Kunukbaki al-Lala, who started as tutor for the children of Sultan Basbai, but his career went far beyond, earning him princely status. He was highly esteemed, enjoyed great honors, and had a large fortune. And his funerary madrasa, in a more central location in Cairo, just abutting to the Azhar Mosque with a stone-carved mausoleum, attests to his prestige. However, this did not prevent that when in the early 16th century an embassy from Ethiopia came with gifts that were found insufficient, the envoy was severely reprimanded by the Mamluk for the shabbiness of his gifts and recalled, in the past you used to send much better gifts than that, and he was shown the list. You see, in the year that was 250 years earlier, you sent a gift worth so and so many dinars, and what have you sent today? So the difference between gifts to fellow Muslims and gifts to Europeans were not only due to religious criteria, but there were other aspects as well. For as I said earlier, Far Eastern spices, Chinese porcelain, Oriental and African scents were treasures that the Europeans at that time could not acquire directly. Also, for example, the Egyptian balsam oil, which was believed to be the best in the world, and which grew in a village, Matareya, not far from Cairo, was very highly appreciated in Europe and in Christian lands for its sacerdotal use. And so it was essentially sent, and it was very valuable, and they say that it was irrigated by a well nearby, which is believed to be the place where the Virgin Mary bathed the child Christ there, and that nowhere else in the world you could get such good balsam. It was as expensive as gold. So this was one of the gifts that were sent to mostly to Europe, but it was also believed to have medical powers, and but you rarely find it sent outside the Christian world. But the most sensational and the star among the exotic animals in the Mamluk among Mamluk diplomatic gifts was the giraffe, which was always specially acclaimed. Oh, I just wanted to show type of textile sent, which this is a church, was used later at Dalmatia for church purpose, but made out of Mamluk textiles as diplomatic gifts. Textile, as I say, were universal everywhere and at all times. But now coming back to the giraffe, which was really the star among all the diplomatic gifts, and there's a tradition. It was not started by the Mamluk. Long before the Mamluks and elsewhere, it was common to send giraffe. It came from Africa. The Ayyubi al-Malik al-Kamil sent a giraffe to Frederick II, the German emperor, and which was reciprocated by an Arctic bear. Al-Zahir continued this tradition and sent giraffe to Alphonse of Castile, Manfred of Sicily, and so on. But the embassy of Qaitbay to Lorenzo di Medici in 1487 had produced also giraffe that became very famous. It included Chinese porcelain, fine textiles, a gorgeous tent, balsam oil and other drugs and scents, jars of sweetmeats, a horse, goats and special kind of Egyptian sheep with big heavy tails hanging to the ground, a lion and a giraffe. It is the giraffe that made the embassy famous and was commented by several Florentine arts and poets. I mean, here I will just, the picture is, this is decisive picture by Vasari. It shows two important elements in Lorenzo's rule. The one is very much in the middle, is the one in the middle here, and you see somebody holding the cardinal cap in his hand as offered. At that time, it was very important. His son had just been appointed cardinal at the Vatican, and this was very important for him and a major success and sign of prestige. But all the other things are the gifts. The gifts of Sultan Qaitbay. It is the giraffe, the lion, and these Middle Eastern peoples who look like, and the horse, there were horses as well, so is depicting the two prestigious gifts that had came to the court during Lorenzo's reign, the Qaitbay diplomatic gifts. Anyway, this is what is here depicted many years later. This is in the 1550s, the gift, it was over 70 years later. But indeed, we know that this diplomatic gift made Qaitbay famous in Renaissance Italy. Poems and eulogies were written about. He was the Sultan who sent the giraffe, and according to Giovo, who writes 1552, it was for a long time a wonderful sight, not only in Tuscany but throughout Italy. So the giraffe had an impact on not only in the ceremonial life at the time, but also it went somehow into the Christian art of the period. There are several examples in Florentine and Italian art at that time of in Christian iconography that show the arrival of the giraffe of Qaitbay. And here in Santa Maria Novella in Florence, you have here where there's this black star, quite prominent in this image here in the center, in the middle of the central area here, this giraffe arriving, this is where it is there. And this is obviously made in those years after the giraffe of Qaitbay that has arrived in the 1480s. So probably there were drawings, not all of them may have seen the giraffe, but there were drawings made and they went on. And in fact, the whole iconography of the Magi seems to have influenced the arrival of the adoration of the Magi, seems to have been influenced by the arrival of the giraffes. Here, Bernardini was a painter who loved to almost specialize adoration of the Magi, and we see here the arrival of, again, a very similar giraffe to the one that was depicted for Qaitbay, and here again the same painter here, and always in connection with the adoration of the Magi. And in fact, the iconography itself of the caravan of the Magi arriving here, and as we see it here as well, it seems to very much to depict the Mamluk embassy, the Mamluk embassy arriving, the way the people look with the animals and the boxes, and the way the people who are accompanying them are depicted. These are Oriental types of person who accompany this caravan. So it played a role in the Christian theme of the adoration of the Magi. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, hi. Yes, so you showed some armor that was sent as gifts to the Mamluks.
Yes.
And on those armor, you had some calligraphic inscriptions. The writing, would that have been there when they received them, or were these put by the Mamluks after they received the armor?
Which writing, which was where?
On the Louvre, you showed some.
On the Timurid one.
Yeah, or there was some armor. You know, the in the Louvre there were armor like the horse.
No, this was original, part of the original decoration.
So the inscriptions were there.
Yes, this is part of the Mamluk way of Mamluk art is always filled with inscription. In particular, weapons tend to be inscribed with the names. Some of them carry names of sultans. One of them is the name of Sultan Khalili. The other one is the name of an emir, plus benedictories and invocations and prayers and so on. They are inscribed, originally inscribed.
Okay, thank you.
It was a very interesting lecture. I enjoyed very much. And I'm not going to ask you a question, but I'd like to make a remark. You mentioned several times the name Jagmak,
Yes.
Sultan Jagmak. And I think that we know that many of the Mamluks were originated from Turkic-speaking countries, Turkic-speaking areas. And
Not only.
Yes, not only. And in that case, I think that his name must be pronounced as Chakmak, which in many Turkic languages stand for
He was
lighting.
Circassian,
And I know that in Arabic there is not a sound ch, there is only j, jim.
Yes.
And you know that many Turkic peoples and Persians, they slightly modified the Arabic scripts and letters, and they derived a new sound and a new letter out of jim, which is chim.
Anyway,
And in that case, the Jagmak may be pronounced as Chakmak.
I'm sure
That's-
all these names, probably you are right, all these names anyway underwent great modification when they came in Arab countries and was spoken by people who were speaking Arabic. It is written in Arabic with jim. So if you, it is Jakmak. How people, the Egyptian will probably have quite probably Gakmak even, because the Egyptians don't speak G. So I'm sure the name, and it's always when I write, I'm always wondering, shall I transcribe the name in the way it was then in Turkey or the way the Egyptians would pronounce it. It's not an easy decision, but every time you have to go and see how was it pronounced originally, where he came from. And even with Turkish name, he was Circassian, so he came from the Caucasus. So it may even be there already underwent some modification. But thank you anyway.
So, Doris, thank you.